It's strange, the things you remember when your world falls apart. I remember the scent of rain on dry Denver asphalt after a sudden summer storm. The way the air would crackle with something clean and new. That's how I felt about my life, about my campaign for city council. Clean, new, brimming with the promise of change. I was 39, fueled by an almost childlike belief that if you just worked hard enough, if your intentions were pure, you could make a difference. I saw problems in our neighborhoods, tangible things that affected people's daily lives, struggling schools, neglected parks, a downtown core that felt increasingly distant from the communities it was meant to serve. And I believed I could fix them. My campaign wasn't just a job. It was an extension of myself, years of community organizing given a voice, a platform. I poured every ounce of my being into it. Every late night, every hand shaken, every flyer stapled to a pole felt like a step towards something genuinely good. I trusted the people around me implicitly, especially Lena, my campaign manager, and Senator Thompson, my longtime political mentor. They were my anchors, the brilliant minds I leaned on, convinced they shared my deep, unwavering vision for civic improvement. Lena, with her sharp intellect and strategic genius, was the engine of the campaign. Thompson, with his decades of experience, was the steady hand, the guiding star. They made me feel formidable, capable of achieving the impossible. Looking back, that feeling, that boundless hope, was a fragile thing, built on foundations I didn't even know were crumbling beneath my feet. I first met Lena at a progressive policy conference a few years back. She was electric, articulating complex ideas with a clarity that left me breathless. I'd been impressed by her track record, her reputation as a force in local politics, the kind of person who could turn an abstract goal into a concrete victory. When she agreed to manage my campaign, it felt like a cosmic alignment. She understood my passion, or so I thought. We'd spend hours in coffee shops, poring over voter data, dissecting policy proposals, her eyes alight with a focused intensity that mirrored my own. She spoke of revolutionizing local government, of empowering citizens, of making Denver a true beacon of progress. Her words echoed my deepest desires. Her strategies always felt perfectly aligned with my ideals. I trusted her implicitly, saw her as a partner, a true ally in a world often defined by cynical self-interest. Senator Thompson had been a mentor since my early days volunteering for various causes. He'd seen something in me, he said, a fire, a genuine heart for public service. He'd offered advice, opened doors, introduced me to people who mattered. His presence on my advisory committee lent the campaign a gravitas, a sense of legitimacy that, as a newcomer to electoral politics, I desperately needed. He was the seasoned veteran, the one who knew the ropes, the one who could navigate the labyrinthine corridors of power. Early on, everything felt right. We were gaining traction. My message resonated. Volunteer numbers swelled. We were knocking on doors, organizing town halls, truly engaging with the community. Lena was a whirlwind, orchestrating events, crafting messages, navigating media interviews with a finesse that left me awestruck. Thompson would call me weekly, always encouraging, always offering a sage piece of advice that would clarify a difficult decision. There were small things, though, tiny fractures in the facade that I chose to ignore. Lena, sometimes, would talk about the game of politics with a glint in her eye that felt a little too detached, a touch too calculating. She'd dismiss my concerns about compromising on a minor policy point, saying, "Aaron, sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. This isn't about purity, it's about power." And Thompson, while always supportive, would occasionally steer me away from my more ambitious, grassroots-focused ideas, suggesting instead a more pragmatic approach that felt a little less revolutionary, a little more establishment. I rationalized it all. They were the experienced ones, after all. They knew how things worked. My idealism needed their pragmatism to survive. I told myself that. I truly believed it. Then, the ground beneath my feet started to shift, slowly at first, imperceptibly. The momentum we had built seemed to hit an invisible wall. Stories began to appear in the local press, subtle hit pieces that weren't outright lies but distorted truths, taking my words out of context, exaggerating minor gaffes. I remembered one article, about a town hall where I stumbled over a statistic that painted me as ill-prepared and out of touch. I knew I'd recovered quickly, clarified my point, but the article fixated on that momentary lapse, making it seem like the defining moment of the evening. It felt like a low-grade fever, a constant, nagging unease. My outreach efforts, too, began to feel less effective. Our carefully planned door-to-door campaigns seemed to miss key demographics. Funds, which Lena assured me were being spent optimally, didn't seem to translate into the expected returns. I'd see our budget spreadsheets, rows and columns of numbers that seemed to make sense on paper, but the tangible results felt off. I remember staring at a graph one evening, showing dwindling engagement in a target precinct, despite Lena's insistence that our digital ads were performing exceptionally well there. The data she presented was always polished, always reassuring, yet a cold dread started to settle in my stomach. I brought these concerns to Lena. She'd listen, head tilted slightly, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Aaron," she'd say, her voice calm and steady. "Campaigns are marathons, not sprints. We're in the thick of it. The opposition is hitting hard. It's normal to feel this pressure. You're doing great. Just trust the process. We've got this." She'd show me a new set of metrics, a projected surge in undecided voters, a positive trend line that always seemed to appear just when my doubts were at their peak. Thompson, when I confided in him, offered similar advice. "Don't let the noise get to you, Aaron. This is where most candidates falter. Keep your head down, stick to the message." Lena is a professional. She knows what she's doing. Their unwavering confidence, their dismissal of my worries as mere campaign stress, made me feel foolish, paranoid even. I started to question myself. Was I losing my nerve? Was my idealism making me blind to the harsh realities of politics? The gnawing doubt intensified, settling in my chest like a lead weight, robbing me of sleep, making me constantly second-guess every decision I made. I felt increasingly isolated, despite being surrounded by my team. The pressure built to an unbearable crescendo. The election was just weeks away, and our numbers were plummeting. Every new initiative I proposed, every idea to re-energize our base, seemed to hit a wall. I wanted to hold a series of spontaneous, grassroots town halls in underserved neighborhoods to directly address the concerns the biased media wasn't covering. Lena agreed in principle, but then the dates would mysteriously conflict, or the venues would fall through, or the funds allocated for promotion would be redirected to more urgent needs, like last-minute digital ad buys that seemed to yield no discernible results. One specific event stands out, a pivotal moment where the threads of my reality began to unravel. We had a critical fundraising dinner planned, designed to re-engage major donors and galvanize grassroots support. I had spent weeks cultivating relationships, personalizing invitations, crafting a heartfelt speech about our shared vision. Lena, in the days leading up to it, began to tinker with the guest list, citing strategic optimizations based on new donor intelligence. She rearranged seating charts, added last-minute speakers I hadn't approved, and even subtly shifted the focus of the evening's agenda, all under the guise of maximizing impact. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I tried to voice my concerns, but she just smiled, that knowing, confident smile, and said, "Aaron, darling, trust me. I know what I'm doing. This will be a triumph." It wasn't. The event was a disaster. Key donors left early, looking confused and disengaged. The atmosphere felt stilted, the message muddled. My carefully crafted speech felt out of place, almost jarring, amidst the chaotic changes Lena had introduced. I saw a look of bewilderment on the faces of people who had once been my staunchest supporters. My heart sank. I knew, intuitively, that something was profoundly wrong. I confronted Lena afterwards, my voice tight with a frustration I could no longer suppress. I remember standing in the deserted ballroom, the lingering scent of stale canapes and disappointment hanging in the air. "Lena," I said, "what happened tonight? That wasn't what we planned." It felt sabotaged. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even get defensive. Instead, she spoke with a clinical detachment that chilled me to the bone. "Aaron," she began, her tone almost pitying, "you're brilliant, truly. But you're also deeply emotional. Sometimes your idealism blinds you to the realities of what it takes to win." I made some adjustments. They didn't land perfectly, perhaps, but it's all part of the process. The political landscape is fluid. You need to be adaptable. You need to trust the expertise around you. This isn't a book club, Aaron. It's a war. Her words twisted in my gut. She made me feel like an immature child, incapable of understanding the complexities of the adult world. Later that night, Thompson called me. Aaron, he said, his voice laced with concern. I hear you had a tough night. Look, Lena is you. Bless, I know, but she gets results. Sometimes, you just have to let the experts do their job. Don't let your passion turn into paranoia. You're a good man, Aaron. Don't let this system eat you alive by fighting battles you don't understand. Their combined reassurances, delivered with such calm authority, chipped away at my sanity. I started to believe them. Maybe I was too naive. Maybe my vision was too pure, too impractical for the dirty world of politics. I questioned my own judgment, my own perceptions. The image of myself, the confident, principled community organizer, began to crack, replaced by a confused, self-doubting shell. My passion felt like a liability. My ideals felt like a weakness. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a swirling vortex of conflicting realities. My sleep became fitful, my appetite vanished. I'd catch my reflection in a window and not recognize the hollow-eyed man staring back. The last few days before the election were a blur of numb despair. My campaign was collapsing. The polls showed me trailing by a significant margin. I was physically and emotionally drained, feeling utterly defeated, yet still clutching onto the thinnest thread of hope. I kept telling myself, just one more push, just one more day, maybe there's a miracle. Then, the miracle arrived, but it was a dark one, shattering everything I thought I knew. An anonymous email landed in my inbox late one night. No subject, just an attachment. It was a link to an encrypted server with a simple password in the body of the email. My hands trembled as I typed it in. What opened before me was a series of messages. Encrypted communications. Between Lena and Senator Thompson. My breath caught in my throat. I read and read. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a furious heat. There it was, laid bare. Their scheme. Not just a misstep, not just poor strategy, but a deliberate, calculated betrayal. They had been systematically undermining my campaign from the start. Lena, feeding misleading information to the press, not just twisting my words, but outright fabricating narratives to diminish my credibility. Thompson, using his influence to subtly redirect funds, ensuring my outreach efforts were starved of resources while publicly endorsing me with honeyed words. They had orchestrated my downfall, every strategic optimization, every necessary adjustment, a carefully placed nail in the coffin of my political aspirations. The messages revealed their cynical view of my idealism, Lena describing it as a quaint weakness to be exploited, Thompson agreeing that my genuine drive made for a perfect, controlled demolition. They spoke of paving the way for a more controllable candidate, someone who understood the real rules of the game. There was a casual cruelty in their exchanges, a detached professionalism that made my stomach churn. They were playing a long game, using me as a pawn, a sacrificial lamb to clear the path for their own entrenched interests. I remember my body shaking uncontrollably, my vision blurred. The room spun. The familiar walls of my small apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like the scene of a brutal crime. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. The dry taste in my mouth, the cold sweat prickling my skin, it was the physical manifestation of my world shattering. Every doubt, every anxiety, every dismissed red flag coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being played. I don't remember much of the drive to Lena's apartment. It was a primal, desperate need to confront the architect of my destruction. I burst in, the damning messages on my phone, shoved it in her face. What is this, Lena? My voice was a raw, guttural sound I barely recognized. She looked at the screen, then at me. There was no shock, no panic, no remorse in her eyes. Just a calm, almost serene resignation. She sighed, a small, dismissive sound. Oh, Aaron, she said, her voice soft, devoid of any genuine emotion. You were never meant to win. Not really. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Your vision, she continued, her gaze steady. It's admirable, truly. But it's naive. Unsustainable. You're too pure for this world, Aaron. You couldn't be controlled. You wouldn't compromise. We needed someone malleable, someone who understood that sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. You were optimized for defeat. She even used the word optimized, the same word she'd used to explain away all her sabotage. The casual brutality of it. My loyalty, she added, shrugging slightly, is purely transactional. It always has been. I played my part. Thompson played his. We cleared the field. I stared at her, utterly devastated. The woman I had trusted, admired, seen as a kindred spirit, was a stranger. A cold, calculating manipulator. Her words were daggers, each one twisting deeper into my soul, confirming the most terrifying suspicions I'd forced myself to suppress. The betrayal wasn't just political. It was personal, a deep, lacerating wound to my very belief in humanity. It wasn't just my campaign that had died. It was a part of me, a hopeful, trusting part one knew I might never get back. The next few days were a blur of hollowed-out despair. I retreated from the world, barely eating, barely sleeping. I felt like a ghost haunting my own apartment, the silence deafening, punctuated only by the frantic hammering of my heart and the echoing replays of Lena's chilling confession. The physical pain was immense, a crushing weight on my chest, a constant tremor in my hands. It wasn't just the loss of the election. It was the annihilation of my ideals, the pulverization of my trust, the gut-wrenching realization that I had been such a fool, so blind, so trusting. Every kind word, every reassuring glance, every shared laugh with Lena now felt like a cruel deception. There was a profound emptiness, a vacuum where my purpose used to be. I wanted to just disappear, to crawl into a hole and never emerge. The thought of facing anyone, of explaining anything, was unbearable. I felt contaminated, foolish, ashamed. The shame was almost worse than the anger at Lena and Thompson, which was a slow, burning ember in my gut. But then, as the initial shock wore off, the anger began to eclipse the shame. Not just anger at them, but a fierce, scorching anger at myself for my naivete, for my unwavering faith in people who clearly saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. This wasn't just about me losing an election. This was about the systemic corruption that gnawed at the heart of the very system I believed I could improve. This was about their cynical worldview winning, about genuine passion being crushed by calculated ambition. And in that anger, a new, fragile seed began to sprout. The realization that I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let their brand of insidious manipulation define the narrative. The decision was agonizing, yet liberating. It meant sacrificing everything I had worked for, every political aspiration I had ever held. It meant publicly acknowledging my own devastating error in judgment. But it also meant reclaiming my integrity, even if it cost me my future in electoral politics. I would expose them. I would reveal the truth, not for personal gain, but for the principle of it. I called a press conference just 2 days before the election. My voice, at first, was shaky, a raw whisper. But as I began to speak, as I laid out the evidence, as I detailed Lena's confession and Thompson's complicity, a strength I hadn't known I possessed surged through me. I didn't hold back. I showed them the encrypted messages, the carefully constructed plan to undermine my campaign. I spoke of the corruption, of the calculated betrayal of public trust. And then, I announced I was dropping out of the race. Not in defeat, I declared, but to shine a light on the darkness. The room erupted. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted questions. The resulting scandal was an earthquake in the local political scene, shaking Denver's establishment to its core. There were days of media frenzy, accusations, counter-accusations, personal attacks on me, painting me as a bitter loser. But there was also a wave of unexpected support, messages from ordinary people who saw through the spin, who felt validated by my confession, who had lost faith in the system and saw a glimmer of hope in my desperate act of truth-telling. In that moment, despite the chaos, despite the pain, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. The clarity, though born of devastation, was a powerful, liberating force. The scandal reverberated for weeks, months even. Senator Thompson faced a formal investigation, his reputation tarnished, his long career ending not with a dignified retirement, but with the taint of corruption. Lena, the brilliant strategist, found herself ostracized, her transactional loyalty proving to be a double-edged sword. Their fates, in the end, became irrelevant to me. My focus shifted inward, then outward in a new direction. I kept my promise. I retreated from public life, at least from the kind of public life I had once envisioned. The initial period was one of quiet reconstruction. I spent long hours hiking in the Colorado mountains, letting the vastness humble me, letting the solitude heal me. I reconnected with old friends, not political allies, but true friends who had known me before the campaign, before the betrayal. I journaled incessantly, processing the trauma, piecing myself back together, one painful memory at a time. The scars remain, a permanent reminder of the price of idealism, but they no longer fester. They have faded to a dull ache, a lesson learned, a part of who I am now. I found a new calling, not from within the system, but as an informed, uncompromised outsider. I started writing, first for a small independent online news platform, then eventually for larger investigative journalism outlets, focusing on local politics, on uncovering the very kind of insidious corruption that had almost destroyed me. My years as a community organizer, my intimate knowledge of the political machine, and my painful experience of its darker side gave me a unique vantage point. I knew how the game was played, who pulled the strings, where the bodies were buried. There's a quiet satisfaction now in seeing a story published, one that exposes malfeasance, one that gives a voice to the voiceless, one that holds power accountable. I'm still fighting for transparency, for genuine change, for the ideals I always held dear. But now, my weapon is the truth, honed and sharpened by betrayal. I don't miss the rallies, the endless fundraising, the hollow promises. I miss the genuine camaraderie, the shared belief in something better, but I've learned that true camaraderie is built on honesty, not on transactional loyalty. I am a different man today. Wiser, tougher, more discerning, yes, but still driven by that fundamental desire to make things better. The naive boy who poured his heart into a city council campaign is gone, replaced by someone who understands the darkness, but refuses to be consumed by it. My path is quieter now, less glamorous, but it feels more authentic, more aligned with my true self. I didn't win the election, but in exposing the truth, in finding my new purpose, I won back my soul. And that, in the end, feels like a far greater victory.